You have made it to the final section of Chapter 29, and let's begin with more about the election where we left off. So, 1968, Nixon wins, Republicans take over the executive office. These are the election results. So, A. Push with Clark. Clutch. Nixon and his domestic policy. We'll talk when we get back to school more about the Nixon era of domestic stuff, but here's a little bit. That silent majority, which he depended on for victory, he is looking to restore order in society. All the civil rights movements, the revolutions that existed in the 60s, is looking to come back to something that is more stable, less chaotic, and that appeals to a lot of people in the country, and that's one of the major reasons that historians point to why he got elected. All right, he claims that, or his platform is based on stopping drugs and crime, racial discord, and draft resistance. Supports the new Social Security benefits in 1972 to allow for re-election. So there will be some liberal programs that Nixon will be in favor of. And for political reasons or pressure from society, whatever it is, there are some things that Nixon does that would not necessarily be normal Republican kind of platforms or ideas. The creation of the Environmental Protection Agency is one, and the Occupational Safety and Health Administration is another. So these are specific agencies by the federal government looking at the environment. In the next chapter, we will look at some of those things that happen from the EPA to try to stop pollution and chemicals and things like that that are being spilled into society or the environment, affecting society. Occupational Safety and Health Administration as well, looking to enhance the lives of workers and make life safer for laborers. Oops. So there's this tough on crime. Say it again. Family assistance plan to provide minimal income to the poor instead of welfare benefits. This was controversial. What had been accepted as welfare benefits during the Great Society, some of that stuff is going to fade away during the 70s, but this is rejected by Congress in a different way to provide services for the poorer parts of society. Embraced fiscal liberalism, not fiscal conservatism, which will be the next era under Reagan, but deficit spending and taking the nation off of gold standard was what the Nixon government or administration was continuing to do. So some of that is put in place by the previous administrations, Johnson and Kennedy. I play this game with my son a lot. He pulls my finger, then something happens. Then you have the space race that happens in the 60s. So by the late 60s, 1969, Neil Armstrong becomes the first man to walk on the moon. Yeah, it's not Michael Jackson. Neil Armstrong was the first moonwalk. So this was a major televised event, and 723 million is estimated to watch on Earth this landing on the moon. And you've heard probably the controversies of it being a hoax and all that kind of stuff, that it was set up, but I wouldn't believe too much about that. This actually happened. This was real. And the Russians had failed several times at trying to get to the moon, and the United States was successful. So Buzz Aldrin and Michael Collins are the other two, along with Neil Armstrong as the commander of this mission. And Michael Collins didn't get to walk on the moon. He was piloting the rest of the spacecraft as these guys spent almost almost a day, I think, a little less than 24 hours on the moon. But the entire mission there took 3 days. Sorry. Here they are. And their mission to the moon, the 3-man crew. This is a famous photograph here of man on the moon. One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind, was what Neil Armstrong said as he got off the lunar module, I think is what it was. Cool story, bro. Alright, so Nixon in Vietnam. He had a secret plan to try to stop the war in Vietnam and be successful in stopping communism from spreading. There begins Vietnamization, which is getting rid of American troops and training and relying on the South Vietnamese resistance to defeat the North and the communist regime under Ho Chi Minh. So 1971, you had 140,000 troops. By 1972, there's only 60,000 troops. So this process here brings home more of the soldiers and less of U.S. involvement, at least on the ground, during the early 1970s. Then there's a plan to bomb Cambodia by the end of the 60s, early 70s. This becomes put in place. So originally secret, and we talked about the Ho Chi Minh Trail going through Laos and Cambodia, and not being able to figure out how the North Viet Cong Army was able to infiltrate the South, and the Tet Offensive that happened. So this tries to eliminate that transportation of troops and goods and vehicles through Cambodia and Laos. But it's a secret bombing. Then there's a announced invasion of Cambodia in April 1970. So this outrages a lot of the younger people, and those anti-war protests begin to increase, specifically on college campuses all across the country. And one pivotal campus unrest riot is at Kent State, and so the public reaction to this is not good at all. Remember, all the stuff can be seen on TV, and the secrets that Johnson and then Nixon kept about the Vietnam War only led to more distrust by the American people. I'm not going to show you that because of copyright rules, but you can look at it if you want on your own. This is the Ho Chi Minh Trail here, and so the Cambodia campaign that Nixon wants to take part is in that region right here, so that this could protect the South Vietnamese government and people, and not allow then the Ho Chi Minh Trail to lead towards South Vietnam. So at Kent State, you can remember this for your quiz, May 4th, 1970, the National Guard is called in and ends up firing on an unarmed crowd, killing 4 and wounding 9. Before this, there is the burning of the ROTC building by unknown people on the campus of Kent State, and that's what brings the National Guard into defending what is the unrest that has happened on Kent State. So there's a little bit more to this than just the National Guard showing up and firing on unarmed students. This is a famous picture. There were 4 killed and 9 wounded, and this is one, I think she was a 19-year-old student here at Kent State that was shot in the firing there by the National Guard. I'm not going to show you this one either. You can look it up if you want. There's some good information on this Kent State shooting on the internet. The American reaction to this is you have protests all across the nation, with about 50 universities involved in rallies, marches, protests. Vietnam vets, women, middle class, all different ethnicities get involved in this anti-war movement. This becomes more evident. Muhammad Ali is a major celebrity that is against the Vietnam War here, becomes a major figure on TV quite a bit. Congress ends up repealing the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which gave a lot of the power to the president to be able to do all of these operations without a declaration of war. So Congress then passes the Cooper Church Amendment, and the troops must be withdrawn from Cambodia by June 30th. So this eliminates that Cambodia campaign and the invasion of Cambodia. A lot of political pressure, social pressure put on through these protests, which get a response by the federal government. All right, so the end of Vietnam, at least the United States involvement in Vietnam here, will be the peace accords in Paris. Yes, it's back in Paris for more peace. So major bombing in North Vietnam to put pressure for peace with honor is the beginnings of this. And eventually you have an agreement that's made between Henry Kissinger, who's a major advisor to President Nixon during this time, NSA advisor, and the North Vietnamese foreign minister. They agree to a ceasefire, and they agree that the general in the South will remain in power until the election, and it releases the American POWs in the North. It's signed by the United States, South Vietnam, and North Vietnam, which is the Communist Party there, with the Viet Cong as the military under Ho Chi Minh. January 27th, 1973 is this signing, and so afterwards you have the North Vietnamese, which launch a full-scale attack on the South in March 1975, basically crushing the South, and the capital of Saigon of South Vietnam falls in April 1975. So very quickly, Vietnam is reunited under communist control. So one country, all communists. The same time that this is happening, there's a civil war that's been raging in Cambodia, and they are led by a communist regime, Khmer Rouge, and they begin a genocide of opposition, killing an estimated 1.5 to 3 million people. And there's this conflict then between the regions, China, Vietnam, Cambodia. Vietnam actually tries to invade Cambodia to drive out Pol Pot, who's part of this leadership of the Khmer Rouge, but they're not successful. China threatens to invade Vietnam, so this area, this region, disrupts into chaos under this transition and a battle for power in this region. But they're all communists at this time. So using the socialist aspects of society, forcing people into labor, restricting freedoms, and having one party that's in control is what happens in Southeast Asia. Okay, so the losses for the United States, you had 58,000 that died during the Vietnam conflict war, over 1,000 that are missing in action, and then over 150,000 that were injured. For South Vietnam, you had 166,000 of the military that died, and 415,000 that civilians were estimated to be killed. The North Vietnamese and Viet Cong, almost 1 million died as the army of the North. The entire cost was $150 billion. Containment didn't work. Communism spread. Southeast Asia. The domino theory played out. These countries were controlled by communism, and some of them still continue to be controlled by communism today. So the Truman Doctrine, with all the efforts of the United States during the 50s, 60s, and 70s, fails. Communism spread. there was a large resentment by the liberal parts of society in the United States and Vietnam veterans. As they came back, they were called baby killers, and they were spit upon, and just in for the military in general had a very negative response by a large portion of the population and a lot of younger people. Again, this is hippies and after hippie generation that have a different philosophy on life, and they did not like the Vietnam War at all. The impact that it had on the government was the War Powers Act. This limited the power of the presidency. So the Gulf of Tonkin resolution gave a ton of power to the president. Then you had the Cooper-Church amendment that said, hey, you got to get out of Cambodia. And then this is passed, and you got to remember this for your test, the War Powers Act. The president may only introduce troops without congressional approval. So they have the ability to do that. They can send troops places, but there's a limitation to that. So the limitations are you have to report it to Congress within 2 days or 48 hours, and you must terminate the use of forces within 60 days unless otherwise authorized by Congress. So this is a shift back from power of the presidency and the executive branch back to Congress. Congress has the power to declare war. There hasn't been a war declared by Congress after World War II. That might bring on a World War III, so you can see why they have avoided that. And they test out this option of giving the power of the presidency to Johnson, and it doesn't go so well. So the response later is to rein in that power with the War Powers Act. The president can do certain things, but a short, limited amount of time, and then Congress has to approve of anything further that will be able to continue. These are the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. What you see here as this arc is the wall that exists with all the names that were soldiers that died or were missing in action along this wall. There's the names there. You can see the Washington Monument in the background, and you have 58,267 names that are listed in chronological order of their death. This is another one that's in Washington, D.C. as the soldiers here. You can see the different ethnicities of the men in the statue. This is the Nurses Memorial here to those that served in Vietnam. Okay, so Nixon's foreign policy after the Vietnam War and during the Vietnam War here, addressing what is communism and relationships with China and the Soviet Union. So beyond that, he's going to support dictators and governments that might fall to communism. So that's still the effort here. That's still containment. It's trying to avoid communism from spreading around the world. And so in Iran, and the Philippines, Nicaragua, and Chile, he's okay, and the United States is okay with anybody that is not going to be susceptible to communism. Yeah, it doesn't have to be democracy. It doesn't have to be great for life for those people within those countries. Freedoms can be restricted, all those kinds of things, but as long as it's not communist, that's what the Truman Doctrine and Nixon is continuing to portray around the world. So Nixon will then lead what is called détente. And the détente in 1972 is just referring to a relaxing of tensions between countries. So what was the heightened parts of the Cold War during Kennedy and Johnson with the Cuban Missile Crisis in Vietnam, he's going to try to reduce the tensions between the big countries that are communist, which are the Soviet Union and China. And he's going to deal with them separately. So there was a rivalry between the Soviet Union and China, and Nixon went in the middle of that and played upon his strengths to negotiate with them separately, not as one entire umbrella of communism, but separate countries. And so that will help him be able to negotiate some of these deals that are made in both countries. So first, with the Soviet Union, they have what they call assault agreements, and there's a couple of these, SALT 1 and SALT 2, but basically it stopped making nuclear ballistic missiles. So the reduction of militarism, the reduction of arms um, by both countries. So and set a standard limitation of 200 for both countries. And it also opens up grain sales. The Soviet Union struggled. Their economy was not that great under communism, and the forced labor. They did not produce towards the ends as much as they needed, and so it opens up some trade. Here is Nixon shaking hands with Leo Brezhnev, who replaces the Khrushchev as the next major Soviet leader. This is Brezhnev looking for détente, and you can figure out what kind of détente he's looking for. This guy is apparently interested in it too. Nixon is unaware of the détente. Yep, Clark's at it again with the jokes. Drinks on you, literally. It's on you. Spilled it. Get it? This is Ford and Brezhnev as Nixon resigns, and these continuation of negotiations and talks between the two countries. So that's Ford there looking for a handshake, and Brezhnev's looking for the ducks. Same picture, different meme. I agree to nucks, not nukes. It's pretty good. Yeah, I made these. You're welcome. Woo! Eyebrows on fleek. So this is Brezhnev in his later years as he grew out his eyebrows and conjoined them together to form the unibrow. It also kind of looks like they removed his mustache and put it on top of his forehead. Nixon and détente continued. So besides dealing with Russia, he's going to deal with China. And in China, this becomes known as ping-pong diplomacy. I'm not making this up. This is actually what they called it. So they opened up a tournament of ping-pong, and countries came to China to participate in this ping-pong tournament. And this leads then to the United States being allowed to enter into China, and Nixon will come with his wife to visit Beijing and do some touring of China. So it allows UN membership, economic and cultural exchanges to happen between China and the United States. Here is the ping pong. This is just a ceremonial ping pong picture here. This is Henry Kissinger. I don't know who this is. Somebody representing the Chinese government playing a little game of ping pong for. This is Mao and Nixon as they meet and shake hands. This is a big deal. This is the bridging here of two completely different ideologies as how to govern a people, and neither would want the other to have influence over its own people. So this is a part of détente here, the relaxing of tensions between the two countries. Here's Nixon and his wife on the Great Wall of China. Here's Nixon trying some Chinese food. No memes, but go, create your own. Submit it to the meme contest. Alright, so Nixon as a president, he lost the election in 1960. He was basically out of politics for a while and then reemerged to become president in 1968, and then will win the election in 1972 as well. So around that election, he becomes extremely paranoid about the possibilities of losing and what the Democrats are doing. And so he tightens his inner circle towards the 72 election so that he could stop any information leaks that were happening. So this is known as the Plumbers. And the Plumbers were this organization assigned by Nixon to make sure that information was kept secret classified information, stuff they didn't want to be made public, that it was not leaked into the media circles. So Daniel Ellsberg turns over military documents outlining the military history of Vietnam, and that's not good for Nixon as far as his perception amongst the American people, as what then the government will be revealing as what their plans were for Vietnam all the way back to Eisenhower. So Nixon attempts to stop the New York Times from printing these, as they are known as the Pentagon Papers, and it's denied. The Supreme Court rules in favor of the Times as being able to present this as public information. And so Nixon attempts to prosecute Ellsberg on espionage charges, but then eventually those charges are dismissed. Okay, so Nixon's paranoia is around information, around the executive privilege, as he called it, to keep information from the public as they deemed necessary. All right, so he wins the 1972 election in a landslide, and then that will turn into the Watergate scandal. So around this 72 election, there's a break-in at the Watergate Hotel. And so the break-in is by an organization that was authorized by the president, known as the CRP, or the Committee to Re-elect the President, which was later known as CREEP. So this Watergate scandal will be on your quiz also and on your test. There are 5 people that are arrested going through the files and planting listening devices in the Democratic National Committee headquarters at Watergate, at the Watergate Hotel. So Nixon denies knowing anything about the break-in. And then 2 Washington Post reporters, Woodward and Bernstein, follow the evidence all the way to the White House. And so they link Nixon to this Watergate scandal and the authorization by Nixon to institute these wiretappings and going through the files. Yeah, so that's Nixon not hiding anything. Check for yourself. Okay, so Watergate continued here. At Senate hearings, aides revealed that the president had secretly taped White House conversations. Okay, so this was common, in which Nixon, as he had meetings in the Oval Office or in somewhere in the White House, they taped the conversations to know exactly what was said and to be able to go back through those things to get details. So there's a special prosecutor assigned to this, Archibald Cox, and he's fired by Nixon because he insists that the tapes be turned over so that this could be used as evidence against Nixon. And this is known as the Saturday Night Massacre. There's other people that are involved in this, but Archibald Cox is the main one that you got to remember. Remember that too for your quiz. I believe that's part of it, is the Watergate scandal. So the Supreme Court then comes in and rules that the tapes must be given to the new special prosecutor, Leon Jaworski. And basically that'll be the end of Nixon, because these tapes will implicate him on his involvement within the Watergate scandal. But there is 19 minutes that are erased from these tapes, and it's alleged that Nixon had the authority and probably did that himself to make sure that the incriminating evidence was never found. So the president ends up resigning on August 9th, 1974 to avoid inevitable impeachment and the possible removal of his presidency. So I think we got we got a video here before the memes. I'm going to show you this one. Hopefully it's not under copyright, but it probably will be. We're going to give it a shot anyway. This will explain Watergate.
History. Welcome to WatchMojo.com, and today we'll be learning more about the Watergate scandal.
The thing that's so appalling to me is that the president, when this whole idea was suggested to him, didn't in righteous indignation rise up and say, "Get out of here, you're in the office of the President of the United States. How can you talk about blackmail and bribery and keeping witnesses silent?"
In mid-1971, the Pentagon Papers were leaked. That report proved that administrations from Truman to Johnson had intentionally expanded their Vietnam War efforts, in contrast to what the public was told. The Nixon administration then panicked and formed a covert group to halt leaks. Nixon advisor John Ehrlichman assembled the White House plumbers and included former CIA agent E. Howard Hunt and former FBI agent G. Gordon Liddy. Soon, the president's political rivals were recorded on Nixon's enemies list. Politicians, journalists, and even Hollywood actors Nixon feared could stop his re-election were included, and were harassed by the administration with tax audits, legal action, and more. Prior to the 1972 election, the Republicans created a Committee for the Re-election of the President, or CRP. John Mitchell stepped down as Attorney General to chair that committee. The CRP used questionable and illegal means to achieve their goal. For example, Mitchell kept a slush fund to subsidize information gathering on the Democrats. Ultimately, a plan was approved to bug and steal information from the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate Hotel. On June 17, 1972, during the second of these break-ins, the burglars were arrested.
The Democratic National Committee is trying to solve a spy mystery. It began before dawn Saturday when 5 intruders were captured by police inside the offices of the committee in Washington.
The FBI quickly linked those arrested with Hunt. Because of Hunt's connection to the plumbers, Nixon ordered his chief of staff, Bob Haldeman, to instruct the CIA to block further FBI investigation into the finances behind the Watergate break-in. The cover-up began.
Mr. Nixon, did you know about the burglary of our Democratic National Headquarters at the Watergate?
The Nixon administration then officially denied involvement in the burglary. However, more clues emerged that conflicted with this. Aside from the Hunt connection, one of the burglars was a Republican Party aide, and a paper trail led to the CRP. On June 20th, Washington Post journalists Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein reported on the Hunt connection, with confirmation from their anonymous source, Deep Throat. This team was instrumental in unraveling the Watergate case, and in implicating the Justice Department, the FBI, the CIA, and the White House. In 2005, Deep Throat was revealed as former FBI Deputy Director Mark Felt. By September 1972, the burglars, Hunt and Liddy, were indicted by a grand jury. Despite connections to the scandal, Nixon was decisively re-elected that November. The burglars pleaded guilty before Hunt and Liddy went to trial in early '73. The scandal soon exploded when many of the administration's important figures were implicated. In April, 4 top Nixon aides lost their jobs due to their involvement in the cover-up. Haldeman, Ehrlichman, Attorney General Richard Kleindienst, and White House lawyer John Dean. Official investigations began in mid-1973, led by Senator Sam Ervin and Special Prosecutor Archibald Cox. They proved the connection between the burglary and the White House and CRP. Dean became a valuable witness when he divulged Nixon knew about the cover-up. In July, Nixon assistant Alexander Butterfield explosively revealed the existence of Nixon-installed recording devices throughout the White House. Those tapes were subpoenaed. However, Nixon refused to release them, citing executive privilege.
This principle of confidentiality of presidential conversations is at stake in the question of these tapes. I must and I shall oppose any efforts to destroy this principle, which is so vital to the conduct of this great office.
To save himself, Nixon dismissed the Attorney General, his deputy, and Cox in the Saturday Night Massacre. Public outcry followed, and Nixon responded with one of his most quoted speeches in November '73.
People have got to know whether or not their president's a crook. Well, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got.
By March, the Watergate Seven were indicted. Many spent time in prison, and though Nixon was named, he remained unindicted. The Watergate tapes were finally released in July 1974. An 18-minute erased section proved controversial. Of the exposed facts, it was found that some involved in the break-in had received hush money. Most importantly, the smoking gun tape undeniably proved Nixon knew about the cover-up since mid-1972. Nixon was forced to step down or face impeachment. On August 8, 1974, Nixon resigned and was replaced by Gerald Ford. Exactly 1 month later, Ford officially pardoned him. This controversy resulted in multiple arrests, the creation of new laws, renewed interest in investigative journalism, and the first resignation of a U.S. president. The Watergate scandal undoubtedly changed American politics forever.
Thanks, WatchMojo.com. Please don't copyright us so that my kids can learn. All right. Let's finish this up. So Watergate, that's what leads to Nixon's demise and eventually his resignation. Here's him and Brezhnev as he shows him where he puts the bugs or the listening devices. Peace. I'm out. All right, so that's the end of Chapter 29. You made it. Spring A push is complete. So I'll see you on Monday, and be ready for the quiz. Chapter 28 and 29, we will have the quiz, and I'll see you then. Okay. Oh, there's one more joke here. It's from Ayana Millet. I don't have the meme ready, but I'm just going to give you the joke. So if pronouncing my V's like B's makes me sound Russian, then Soviet. Alright. Na 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 na. Yep.